There's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
You like me right now. You like me.
Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted this.
Mom, I just want an Oscar.
I'm Colin, and welcome back to another episode of the Ultimate Oscar Showdown. And this week we're going to be looking at a new category, the Best Actor category, and I'm going to be ranking my favorites from this decade, the 2010s, from S tier all the way until D tier, in between them, sort of ranking them all, not necessarily 1 to 10, but in different tiers, S being the highest, D being the lowest. And we've been doing a Best Picture rankings for the past few weeks from the 2010s all the way to the 1940s. Now we're going to be breaking down the acting category, so let me explain how this is going to work. So essentially, I'm going to be covering each week a different decade, ranking the Best Actor category from the 2010s all the way into the 1970s. Then when we're done with the 1970s, I'm going to go into the Best Actress category, go from the 2010s to the 1970s, then rank both the supporting actor categories in actor and actress, and then hopefully by then we'll be into the Oscar season fully and breaking down my thoughts for once again another season of old Oscar countdown. But we've got one chunk out of the way, 1/5 out of the way for those Best Picture rankings. You guys have shown a lot of support, but you know, now we're in the 2010s, now we're in a little bit more recent stuff, so you don't have to be watching 1940s movies if you want to stay tuned. You can watch a lot of these movies that you probably have already seen. But without further ado, let's jump into things, starting off with the 2010 Best Actor winner, Colin Firth from The King's Speech. And I talked about this video in my 2010's Best Picture ranking, of course, because this movie won Best Picture, so we won't go too much in depth for this performance, but it's a movie that I think has been unfairly maligned because it beat out The Social Network. Now here on the Ultimate Oscar Showdown, we don't judge movies based on who they beat, but just the performance in the movie itself. And I think Firth here embodies the role of King George. Firth is a tall actor, 6'2", so he can really be, overpowering in his stature, but he's the opposite of that in this movie. He uses against himself, whether it be Tom Hooper framing himself in the corner of frames to make him seem a little bit smaller, or just even at the beginning of the movie, the sort of hunched shoulders, the sort of diminutive physicality that Firth brings to the role, I think works really well because he's playing this King George who has a stutter, who wasn't supposed to be the king, who was always sort of the secondary brother, who had the stutter, who was sort of pushed away from the limelight, all of a sudden is being thrust as a king, during a war. So this is a big time to be a king. This could be potentially the overtaking of Britain. I mean, this was a serious threat. And we see this guy, and he's so diminutive despite his stature. He's, of course, got the stutter, which I think a lot of people really appreciated and probably gave him the Oscar because he has that little extra thing, where, of course, Colin Firth in real life doesn't have a stutter. But in the movie, he's very convincing at having one. But I really think it's just the way I appreciate the performance of how small he is, how he sort of actually doesn't carry himself as this big, larger-than-life kind of a figure. He feels like this meek secondary brother who's forced into this role unwillingly, and he's that sort of charisma and confidence brought out of him, and I think Firth is able to sort of play both. And then of course with the stutter too, an impressive trick that he's able to do that still works, of course, with the natural dramatic stakes of the story and the real life story. So this is a movie that I don't think is maybe as good as The Social Network, but still super solid, and I think Firth is good in it. So I'm going to put this performance the same grade that I put the movie in, which is the B tier. Then we have Jean Dujardin from The Artist, another Best Picture winner, which we talked about on the 2010s episode. And I'd actually argue that Jean Dujardin winning for Best Actor is even more of a Oscar crime than the movie winning Best Picture, because I think Brad Pitt in Moneyball gives his best performance of his career, and I think it's one of the best performances of the decade. I actually covered a Best Performances of the Decade video a couple years ago, my top 10 in the 2010s on this channel, so check that out if you want to hear all my thoughts of the best performances. But I love Brad Pitt in that. But regardless, we're talking about Jean Dujardin here, and he was very much benefited by the success of The Artist. I think he sort of rode the wave of the movie being so beloved and winning Best Picture, and then they threw in the Best Actor win as well. And his performance style, particularly in this movie, is closer to Gene Kelly than it is Daniel Day-Lewis. It's all charisma, it's all charm, it's less so transformative sort of performance. And a performance doesn't necessarily need to be transformative to win this award, but oftentimes we do see those types of performances win. What I actually like about the performance is because like I imagine a lot of people who saw the artist for the first time, didn't know too much about Jean Dujardin, and so when we're watching the movie, it's not like you're seeing a famous actor being a silent movie. It feels like it's almost a lost silent movie because you don't really know this guy too well. He feels like somebody that they just plucked out of the era, and he fits very well within the sort of silent movie star. Very charismatic in terms of his facial expressions and the way he carries himself, and just the fact that his charisma is able to shine past, and regardless of dialogue, you can tell that he's sort of this charming, suave kind of a character. It's a performance that's hard not to like because it's so charming, even if it's not the most complex. But still, you know, it's a solid movie. I'm going to put his performance in the B tier. Then 2012, Daniel Day-Lewis in Lincoln. One of the best transformative performances of all time, I think. Of course, Daniel Day-Lewis, unfortunately retired, but in his later period here, putting out these roles, really one of the best actors of all time, particularly of his generation. And it's one of these performances that plays like a magic trick, in that you look at a picture of him in Lincoln, and then you look at a picture of Daniel Day-Lewis, and they really don't look like the same person. You know, Lincoln's someone that is an idea more so than as a person. We don't have video footage of him like we do Winston Churchill or Freddie Mercury, which we'll talk about later. But the idea of him is still large in people's minds, so there is a way to sort of portray him. And I think this is going to go down as the definitive performance of Lincoln. Just the way he is so calm and reserved, the way even Daniel Day-Lewis slumps in his sort of chair, the way he approaches the character just to be sort of calm and reserved and not to always shout but be passionate. He has incredible control of the room despite him being reserved and quiet a lot of the time, because when he does speak, it's powerful, it's short, but it's meaningful. And even just the sort of stature of the man, you can see the sort of weatheredness in his face from the position, how tired he is because he has to make all these decisions, and being in a war, trying to end that, trying to get this bill passed to stop slavery. It's like this really big time and stressful time in anybody's life, particularly this man's. And we can see that sort of tiredness and that weatheredness of Daniel Day-Lewis playing seemingly way older. Just that tiredness, the way he's still able to control a room, the way he was able to deliver the passion. You understand why this man was so alluring and an important president within American history. I think Daniel Day-Lewis totally transforms as him. You don't see him whatsoever. And that's with essentially no prosthetics either. It's really just an incredible magic trick. He's one of the great actors of all time, and it's remarkable just to see him act. So it's still, for me, an S tier performance. Then we have Matthew McConaughey in Dallas Buyers Club. At the height of the McConaissance, you know, it sort of peaks out later with Interstellar and True Detective. And, you know, as a teenager starting to get into film seriously, McConaughey was sort of peaking at the perfect time for me. That period of Dallas Buyers, or really Mud, Dallas Buyers Club, Wolf of Wall Street cameo, into True Detective, then with Interstellar, it's like, you want to talk about just defining movies of that period and people of my age? It's Wolf of Wall Street. It's True Detective for TV. It's Interstellar. So I'm glad McConaughey has this Oscar, even if, you know, looking back on it, I wish he maybe would have gotten it for something like Interstellar. Dallas Buyers Club is still a terrific film. Now, it's a hard film to rewatch and get into, which I think is a reason why this performance is not in that same echelon as Wolf of Wall Street, as Interstellar. You know, those were some of the best movies of the decade. Dallas Buyers Club, I don't think, is in that similar vein, just because it's a hard watch. It's, of course, it's a great, serious story, but the subject matter just doesn't lend itself to, say, multiple rewatches. It's like a powerful movie that you really only want to watch maybe one, two times. But regardless of your opinion of the movie, I think McConaughey's performance is terrific. I just like the angle that the movie takes and that McConaughey really embodies, which is this fact that this is a guy, Juan Woodruff, who is essentially selling HIV drugs and ailments that are not FDA approved to local members of his community who have AIDS, and just the sort of angling of this being a man who has AIDS helping people out within his community. I mean, this is not a white knight story of someone coming in and feeling bad for them and just wanting your sympathy. This is a guy who's doing something for himself, but also to help others. And he did all this work essentially for himself to figure something out, and then learned all this knowledge and then decided to give back. It's a member within the community, helping other people within the community, and just the physical transformation of McConaughey getting so skinny, getting so slender. There's no doubt this guy has AIDS or not, or it's an actor thinking. It's like, no, this guy really looks sickly. He really looks like he's got everything he can give and is sacrificing so much and trying to hold on to his life as much as he can, which makes it a very tragic story. So an emotional, solid, dramatic performance from McConaughey, but very well tailored to the type of film that they're trying to tell. So for me, it's going into the A tier. Eddie Redmayne, The Theory of Everything, was the 2014 winner, and I think is maybe the transformative performance of the decade, aside from something like Daniel Day-Lewis in Lincoln, because we knew Daniel Day-Lewis was great, but Eddie Redmayne went from a little bit unknown actor to a real powerhouse overnight. Now, his post-Theory of Everything career wasn't necessarily as fantastic as maybe we'd hoped. That being said, that doesn't take away from this performance being really terrific. You know, the big standout factor being his transformation into someone with ALS. You know, he's a person who doesn't have a disability, but portraying a disability on the screen is seemingly very difficult because it's essentially your body not being able to control itself. And you know, as an actor, you have to sort of portray that. But of course, you're trying to think of the moves that someone would do when they don't have control of their own body. It's a fascinating sort of balancing act that I think he does very well. There's certain times that the movie asks him to be very melodramatic, which I think sort of hurts the overall performance and some of the subtleties, because he really goes big in certain instances, which I think maybe he can pull it back a little bit. But I would actually argue that the performance is almost a little bit underrated, because everyone thinks of the stuff with the ALS and that transformation there. But he's actually really good in the first half of the movie too, where it's essentially, you know, a rom-com at Oxford with Felicity Jones. He's funny and awkward and charming and can do that too. And that's, you know, a good part of the movie as well. So a standard biopic kind of a movie with an excellent performance from Eddie Redmayne at the front. Even if he does sort of go a little bit big at certain instances, it's still a solid performance that will go into the B tier. Leonardo DiCaprio, The Revenant, 2015, the win we were all waiting for. Unfortunately, probably not the movie that he'll be most well remembered by. You know, this really does feel like okay, Leo, it's your time, we're going to give you the win. This feels like Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman. This feels like Renee Zellweger for Cold Mountain, when she probably should have gotten for Chicago. It's one of those wins where, yeah, it's finally your time, but are we really going to think of this as Leo's best performance? I don't think I will. And I think I'm sort of holding that against the film, but, you know, unfortunately that's just my viewpoint. And I think this performance is good, but not necessarily great, maybe not necessarily Oscar tier level, just because, you know, he's CGI in parts of the movie with like the bear scenes, so there's not really physicality there. So much of the physical acting in terms of this grueling nature of his body is being, you know, shadowed from the big bear suit that he's wearing and all the fur that he has, so you don't get the physical aspect there. He doesn't have a lot of dialogue to work with. It's a lot of sort of emoting and big close-ups with Manuel Lubezki's framing, but it's a survival movie. It's not necessarily a movie that shows off his acting ability, and I think they gave him the Oscar because he slept in a dead carcass overnight to feel more realistic and more connected to the character. It feels like a grueling shoot in Alberta, and we'll give it the Oscar because we've never had one before, and this seems like it was a really tough performance to do, even if the performance itself isn't necessarily transcendent to the way we've seen him before in Shutter Island, in Wolf of Wall Street, in Django. It's not of that level, so unfortunately for me, you know, it's not a bad performance, it's just nothing special, so it goes into the C tier. Casey Affleck, Manchester by the Sea, a strange winner in this decade, because if you look at this decade, 7 out of the 10 winners were actors playing real life people. And I would even argue it's really 8 out of the 10 winners, because if you include Joaquin Phoenix of Joker, that was a character that everyone knew about in the same way people knew about Freddie Mercury. You know, there have been other portrayals of that in the case of Joker with Jack Nicholson. Heath Ledger was a notable sort of a character. But with Casey Affleck here, it's a true sort of 70s type character piece in that it's created from whole cloth. It's not based on anyone. It's not a transformative performance. It's Casey Affleck with, you know, no makeup or anything whatsoever. And it's about just this depressed janitor who has to take on the guardianship of his nephew after his brother dies. And then we understand more about the character and learn why he's depressed and his past and his children and his wife. And I think this is just an absolutely pitch-perfect, heartbreaking performance. I mean, the contents of the movie are so easy to paint them as melodrama, to be over the top and big and grandiose. But that's not this movie. This movie's subtle. You know, there's a statement in acting, sort of an old adage, in which, you know, seeing someone cry isn't that effective. It isn't that emotional. But seeing someone try not to cry is probably the most emotional thing you can do. When you see someone trying to hold it back and they don't want to show that emotion, but the emotion's sort of overcoming, and that's, you know, that's incredibly emotional. And that's what this movie is so great at. It is that feeling for an entire movie. This is a deeply repressed kind of a man, and depressed man, who's sort of not been really confronting his emotions at that time, and sort of been walking through life. And through the movie, sort of these events bring themselves to light, and we start to understand things with the death of his brother, and then him trying to have a connection with his nephew. We know so much pain is inside him, and he's just giving us little glimpses of it, but we know that there's so much you know, behind that. And just a perfect, subtle performance. It's a performance that Casey Affleck was born to play, and I think just perfectly calibrated. There's not something that I would do differently within his performance. And I think about the jailhouse scene all the time, and just so perfectly well realized and emotional. And there are few performances that make you think about it often, and this is one of those for sure. So for me, there's not a false note in the entire movie, so I have to put it into the S tier. Gary Oldman, 2017, Darkest Hour, which I think is a performance that has been sort of mocked in recent years as being a little bit over the top, or a weird Oscar win. But for me, it's always been a personal favorite because it's over the top. Because I think, you know, this movie, because of its Oscar win, was sort of seen as the serious, dramatic movie. And it's a serious, dramatic topic, you know, of Winston Churchill battling Hitler. In this movie, more about the war rooms and the tactics of it all. But what I actually like a lot about the movie is the kind of silliness of Winston Churchill's character. And I think Gary Oldman sort of understands that. He's in the prosthetics. He really does look like Winston Churchill. And yet, he's just interested in having fun with some of his staff members, or going to the tube and talking to the people on there. But some of these sort of over-the-top big speeches and grandiosity, the larger-than-life figure of Winston Churchill, I think Gary Oldman really portrays. And I love sort of saying a lot of the lines after seeing the movie, and sort of the over-the-top nature. And I think Oldman captures that somewhat juvenile nature and unpredictability of Oldman that is, truthfully, I think, a lot of fun. So like Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman, or Al Pacino in Heat, or Willem Dafoe in Lighthouse, this sort of big, over-the-top, kind of a fun performance to view in that viewpoint is the way I've always approached Darkest Hour, not as a serious period piece, but as this sort of big, over-the-top, grandiose, swinging for the fences, screaming match kind of a movie. And in that, I really enjoy it. So it's kind of maybe a guilty pleasure type of a performance, but one that I still really enjoy. So for me, it's going to go into the A tier. Then Rami Malek, 2018, one for Bohemian Rhapsody. And we've seen this throughout the past decade or so with Eddie Redmayne and Rami Malek, and then I think most recently with Austin Butler, these young actors who not a lot of people know about, star in a big movie about a real-life person. In the case of Elvis or Bohemian Rhapsody, of music stars, or even someone like Taron Egerton with Rocket Man, and they sort of go for the Oscar and they try to get nominated, and they're really announcing themselves as like, I'm a serious movie star, I can open a movie, I'm going to be the next Leonardo DiCaprio, or whoever. They're trying to be the next big movie star. And Eddie Redmayne, I think, has had a disappointing kind of post-Oscar career. I think Rami Malek has a unfortunate sort of post-Oscar career. I actually think Austin Butler will have a good post-Oscar career because he didn't win the Oscar, because there's weird things where these young actors want the Oscar so much that it feels like, oh, okay, we reward you for that, and then you're going to do some weird stuff, and we're not going to appreciate you anymore. But with Austin Butler, there's a sense of always trying to do interesting projects and interesting roles because he didn't win out for this one here. I think he'll be more respected in a weird sort of Oscar way. Sometimes it helps not to win the Oscar so early on in your career. I think that's going to happen with Butler. But Rami's win here personally has always sort of confused me, because the appeal of these sorts of biopic movies is the singing and the dancing. And Rami doesn't do that. He doesn't do his own singing. You know, he looks a lot like him with the prosthetic teeth and some of the prosthetics that he adds to his face. He does embody that Freddie Mercury aspect, but this is not a movie that I thought a lot about. I somewhat enjoyed it in the theaters, but haven't thought about it since, and thought some of the story beats were poorly done in the moment. So it's a performance that doesn't really stick with me. It's a performance where you go, hey, that guy looks a lot like Freddie Mercury, but maybe not a performance that wows you in a movie that's just okay. So for me, it's never been something that I really love. It's going to go into the C tier. Then the final winner here, Joaquin Phoenix for Joker. Another controversial type of a winner, but only controversial amongst the critical community. I mean, actual voters in the Academy loved it. They gave it 2 Oscar wins. You hear creatives like Greta Gerwig and Phoebe Waller-Bridge talk how much they love the movie. And any person you talk to in real life, we talk about the movie, they love it. I mean, the public made $1 billion. Everyone loves this movie. It's really only just a subset of critics that for some reason don't like it, and you don't really know why they don't like it. I think probably because it doesn't fit always their political beliefs in a certain way, but I think it's undeniable this performance in this film really captured and hit a core audience segment within this period, this sort of anger and rage and this the sort of almost distrust of government institutions and this feeling of wanting to rebel. I think it was telling in terms of capturing this feeling in late 2019. And I think even if you don't like the movie, though, a lot of people appreciate Joaquin as the Joker because of his take towards it. I mean, let's not forget, when Jared Leto was playing Joker, it was a huge thing because Jack Nicholson does it, iconic, no one's able to do it. Then Heath Ledger does it, brings something new to the character, okay, iconic, no one's able to top that now. And then Joaquin comes out and he actually, in certain people's eyes, does top those performances because he gives another angle into it. It's not just, I'm a crazy madman who wants to see the world burn, or I'm sort of a juvenile clown in the case of Jack Nicholson's performance. It's like I'm a mentally ill, deranged man who doesn't get the support from society that he needs, who sort of bursts over the top. And Joaquin, I think, is so great at playing that uneasiness. So much of the tension of the film is you don't know if this guy is going to kill you or laugh at you. He's so unhinged. You really don't know what's going to happen. And because of that, there's a lot of tension that's being built within the film, in part because of Joaquin's performance. And then I think there's a lot of beauty in the film too that Joaquin brings with some of the dancing sequences and some of the his relationship with Zazie Beetz' character. And I think it's perfectly calibrated because you feel the empathy for Arthur, but you also are scared by him and you understand this is the mentally ill guy who's not getting the support that he needs, and he just goes over the top. And it's a fascinating but incredibly scary, intense performance. So you're scared as well when watching the movie. So it's crazy to think also that this is the same guy that did Her and Come On, Come On. He just got so much range. And I think Joker, because he won the Oscar, will go down as one of his best performances. And I think it's an absolute terrific movie, one of the best of 2019 that year, in a terrific year. So for me, this is an incredible performance and S tier stuff. But that's about it, guys. Take a look at the list. I'm going to have a preference towards the 2010s just because this is the decade where I really started to love movies, so I have a lot of fondness for some of these performances. It's a little bit of a bias on my end, but I still think, 3 S-tier performances. These are really 3 great performances. Daniel Day-Lewis, Joaquin Phoenix, even Casey Affleck. Those are incredible actors. So great stuff all around. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your ranking. I love to hear that sort of stuff. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more of the videos. Next week, of course, I'm going to be looking at the 2000s Best Actor tier ranking. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.